Hi everyone, welcome to BRICS Briefs. Today's episode is the first of two dedicated to the BRICS Bank, or its formal name, the New Development Bank. There are a number of news stories going on right now that we could easily call wacky. So let's try to get a little bit of order and tell you what is going on in the BRICS world. For the last few weeks, we've been joined by the ever-pungent language of Rod McKenzie. Let's bring the guys on. Here we go. Who stars on the SEO BRICS Insight YouTube channel. And we're happy to say we've been able to confirm the participation of economic analyst Terry Boyland, the CEO of Firm Economics, who's reporting from Brazil. Hi guys, thanks for coming.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, you're in Brazil. So we got quite a evening here in Australia. So at the end of this episode, we'll give you a sneak peek at next week's episode, which is going to be really interesting. We've got a special guest joining us from South Africa. So hopefully he can come, but we're just, I'm just saying hopefully because sometimes it doesn't, there's, as professionals, that may not happen. So hopefully. So stay with us and join the discussion with questions and comments. We'll start with a short video infographic explaining the history and workings of the BRICS Bank. So let's set the record straight about the recent rumors about the BRICS Bank in China. The NDB is not unused. It has been around since 2014 and is still going strong. See you in a bit. Enjoy the show.
Bank, or NDB, is an international financial institution jointly established by BRICS countries Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. At the 6th BRICS Summit in 2014, BRICS countries agreed to set up a development bank based in Shanghai, and in July 2015, the bank formally opened. At the inauguration, China's Finance Minister Lou Jiwei said the bank serves as a new platform for South-South cooperation and facilitates economic cooperation between developing countries. The NDB has an initial authorized capital of $100 billion and a subscribed capital of $50 billion equally distributed among the 5 countries. The president of the bank shall be elected from one of the founding members on a rotation basis and will serve a 5-year term. Indian private banker KB Kamath has been appointed as the first head of the bank. The bank only includes BRICS countries at the moment, but has a combined population of 42.6% of the world's population and a land area of a third of the world. In the NDB, the 5 BRICS countries cooperate based on the principle of equality. The NDB sold its first UN-denominated bonds worth 3 billion yuan, or $449 million, to raise funds for clean energy projects in July 2016. The NDB is committed to an equal and innovative cooperation model among developing countries.
There we go. So hopefully that's the basics. But let's take a closer look at the differences between a development bank and a central bank that issues currency. This should be pretty clear to most of our viewers, but the recent rumors about a potential BRICS common currency are generating a lot of speculation. So in a few words, Rod, can you give us a lowdown on the situation?
Yeah, I mean, the difference between the New Development Bank of BRICS and a central bank is quite different. As the name implies, it's a lending institution for development of things, so development of BRICS projects, etc. So, it's similar in a way to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, except that the IMF tends to lend money to governments in trouble, where and it's an institution that doesn't issue currency, etc. Its capital is made up by its members in the same way that the New Development Bank's capital is made up by the member countries. So it's not looking at being involved in the currencies, and I don't think it ever will. Its brief is to, as we saw from the video, is to finance infrastructure or particular projects.
Okay, yeah. Did you want to add anything, Terry? Or that's okay.
No, sure. I mean, as Rob mentions, the purpose is not to deal with currencies, but you did mention the idea of a BRICS currency, and of course that's something that's been discussed a lot. With regard to a specific BRICS currency, in line with something similar to the euro, be it just digital or physical, that's probably not going to happen in the near future. But the ability for us to tokenize, as we mentioned on TV last week, to be able to tokenize the payments and to do a mechanism of transfer of value between sovereign nations and then onto the commercial enterprises at the end in the commercial banks, that's something that will happen. As to whether that becomes a specific remit of the New Development Bank or whether a separate organization ends up being created in order to facilitate that is something that's in debate right now. And of course, it is the one element of the three pieces of having a named token, having an infrastructure, and having a political will that will drive cross-border payments using a single tokenized unit for the BRICS countries. As to how that's structured is something that will be debated in Kazan in October, and then certainly during the presidency of BRICS down here in Brazil for 2025.
Oh, yep, it's coming up. We're waiting for that. No, that's interesting, and people should definitely watch our last episode with Terry because it was excellent. There's a little bit of sound problems, but I would definitely recommend I mean, it's fine because we always have these issues, but it was excellent. Like really, I mean, I actually tried to get a little bit out of Terry, and he's not allowed to give this inside information, okay? Actually, we're not even supposed to say that he has inside information. So ignore that. But it's all right. Like, I'm going to get him in trouble. But anyway, okay. So I've got a few questions because just to prompt and, get this stuff out of you guys, as experts, try and get this out. So I've got a question for both of you. So how do you see the role of the New Development Bank evolving in the next 5 years, particularly in relation to existing global financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank? Either whoever wants to jump in.
Well, personally, I see that the role can only grow as the BRICS countries move away from the Western institutions like the IMF, like the World Bank, etc., which are, I mean, the head of the IMF is always a European, and invariably turns out to be French. The last two certainly have been. The World Bank is always an American. So, these are all Western institutions and Western dominated institutions. And for the BRICS to really succeed, they're going to have to develop their own institutions. And I can see that the New Development Bank is going to be one of those.
Yeah, we mentioned previously that BRICS is about freedom, it's not about control. So right. When you look at the denomination of the dollar as the predominant currency that is used for commodities and often the basis as well for these loans, then the ability for a separate organization like NDB to offer loans in whatever currency is appropriate for the country that requires them. One of the elements that the IMF does, the IMF was set up to promote international economic cooperation, to promote economic growth. But it was also one of its three tenets is it was set up to make sure that the practices that a country are employing are not damaging in their view to the general population or to the global economy. And as a result, often IMF loans are given with a restriction on things that the government can or can't do, how much money they're allowed to spend, perhaps their interest rates being reduced and those elements. Those things NDB up until now, and we hope continuing, will not be involved in because that takes away part of the sovereignty of the fiscal policy of a nation.
it sounds like what you're saying there, and I think this is very important because this is that distinguishment, right? Which we sort of just Rod touched on. That it sounds very political what the IMF does. Would you characterize it like that, Terry, or would you say it's for financial? It's, you know, they're trying to make sure that the country can pay back the loan, or is it political in your view?
So I don't get involved in politics. It is the responsibility of governments to provide an economic framework within which the people in their jurisdiction are able to thrive. There are, of course, things that help when it comes to global economic policy. It's very difficult to implement a single global economic policy right now. I guess that will only happen when the Starship Enterprise is actually created and we've invented warp drive. In advance of that, we have to work with the realities that exist today. So every sovereign nation has a right to be able to create their own framework, providing that framework is respectful of the overall economic community as a whole. If individuals within a country are not content with what's being done by their government, then that's what elections exist for. And it becomes a bit of a polemic situation when governments start to interfere dramatically in the economic policy of other countries using such tools as determining interest rates and determining economic policy on behalf of others. But I won't comment on politics beyond that. For me, it's an economic framework that we're discussing and not the politics of a particular country.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I have my own view. I'm very much a studier of the American system of political economy, but that actually requires citizens to participate in the political process. When they don't, that's an issue, obviously. So, but no, absolutely, Terry. I totally understand. And I've got this question for you, particularly you, Terry. Given the BCCI's, so the BRICS Chamber of Commerce and Industries focus on international business and trade, how do you perceive the impact of BRICS initiatives on global trade dynamics, especially in terms of reducing dependence on Western financial systems?
Yeah, so I guess there's sort of three aspects to that for me. One is de-dollarization, the ability for countries to be able to trade in whichever currency pair and at whatever value that commercially is acceptable for the two legal entities, the commercial entities, the final point of the transaction want to accept. So, that's one element. I think, and I've just lost my thought here for a second. So, Rod, if you want to step in, help.
Yeah, I basically agree with you that the institutions in developing, and some already exist within the BRICS membership for the actual facilitation of trade and development. I mean, the imposition of sanctions, for example, on Russia on its gold sales and its metals, etc., forced it to go directly to Shanghai Gold Exchange or the Dubai Gold and Commodities Exchange. Now, these are just two institutions that are being set up. Now, they're talking about setting up in Egypt a grain and fertilizer exchange where countries of the BRICS will then be able to trade their commodities in their own currencies with each other for the goods that they are purchasing, grains, fertilizers, etc. So that's all part of the process of getting away from the casinos and the institutions like the International Commodities Exchange in London or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where the majority of the transactions are actually paper transactions, and the producers are actually the least important part of the commodity chain. So, the BRICS will be evolving gradually, but some of the bits already exist, like I've mentioned. for them to break away from the chains, if you like, that have held their commodities trading back. So this is where we look at Kazan again, and I'm looking forward to Kazan because it's not that far from me. I go there every May holidays to visit family just north of Kazan. And that's where we're really going to see what's going to happen with the BRICS alternative to the dollar. I mean, whether we call it token or whatever, that's going to happen. And that will just facilitate further the development of the institutions like the New Development Bank, but the commodities exchanges, the trade exchanges, etc., that will take place. I mean, at the end of the day, BRICS control 40% of the oil, 40% of the gas, about 45% of the grains, etc. And their allies control the majority of the rest of it. So it's only going to continue, but it all really does rest on what they come up with in Kazan.
Yeah, and thank you for taking over there. I find that since COVID, sometimes my mind just forgets stuff, and I don't know whether you guys have had that or folks who are listening right now, but it's a challenge. So as Rod mentioned, the other two elements that I was going to discuss was the size of the commodities market within BRICS is very dominant, and as a result, the BRICS alliance, and perhaps you could say that the friendship between BRICS countries, I suspect over time will have a level of influence on the commodities markets directly. And the last, of course, is the dominance of the SWIFT network. So SWIFT is the payments network that's used by most banks. It does a whole bunch of other things, but principally with the MT 102, 101 messages, where international payments are done using a SWIFT transaction over a SWIFT network. That network you can be excluded from, and that has happened. It's happened quite recently. And so the ability to settle transactions between BRICS nations without the need for the SWIFT network will also have quite a dramatic impact on the balance of power and the balance of influence when it comes to global economy.
No, that's interesting.
Exactly.
Actually, yeah,
I'm actually surprised that it hasn't happened before, but that was due to if it ain't broke, let's not try and change it. And I mean, Russia was just as bad as other countries when there could have been alternatives to SWIFT. I mean, I remember, involved with SWIFT going back to the 1980s. And I mean, I remember when it was a telex-based system. Now, probably you do too, Terry, but it was basically a telex messaging system between banks. I mean, probably 70% of the people who watch this video don't even remember what a telex machine was.
Actually, maybe I should tell people it used to work over the telephone network, over the PSTN network, and it was basically simply messages, so letters and numbers. It was basically a message, so a memo.
Yeah,
basically.
SWIFT actually stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications.
Yeah, so it was very simple. Rod, I used to use it up until the 2000s because it provided a highly secure way of messaging between people over the phone network. Yeah. So there are still organizations that still use it, and I suspect they don't talk about it because it's quite expensive through your telco.
So the SWIFT messages themselves are just like telex messages. They're only letters and numbers within a file that's transmitted. And of course, SWIFT itself is supposed to be an organization that's run by the banks, but we've seen that the influence from global governments over it is very, very strong.
Well, that basically SWIFT is actually physically owned by its member banks, but when you have the fiat currencies, particularly the dollar level dominance and the counterparties in transactions being a corresponding bank, which is invariably an American or a European bank, depending on whether you're using dollars or you're using euros, it means it goes through them, and that gives them an inordinate level of influence.
Actually, Terry, maybe, or you, Rod, But I've heard that the SWIFT system doesn't actually reconcile. So so someone wants to send money from, say, Australia to China. So they want to buy something, right? They want to import something, and they send money, right? For what I've heard is that the bank in Australia sends a message to the bank in China and says, I want to send some money to you. But they don't actually send money. It's not actually reconciled. There's a ledger held at both banks, both ends, but it's never actually reconciled. And this was something to do with XRP. I'm sort of getting off the subject here, but I'm really curious whether you guys know whether any sort of, maybe a bit of insider information about that, or am I totally off the track?
Over to you, Terry. You're more of the financial telecommunications guy. I was just a simple financial journalist, scribe who did a bit of technology. But yeah, I mean, SWIFT was literally through one bank. You would do a transaction from London to Moscow. It went through either the US or it went through Deutsche Bank in Germany or Raiffeisen in Vienna. You sent it in pounds. It was converted either into euros and then into euros into Russia and then converted into rubles, or it stayed in whatever. The actual inside workings, I've never worked in a bank, so you obviously work for people like JP Morgan, so you've got much more of an idea of actually how it physically works within a bank. So I'll leave it up to you to answer that question.
So there's typically three parts in a transaction, and my background is in securities more than in payments, so the reference is more towards securities. But the three elements are the trade itself, there's then the confirmation, and then there's the settlement. So the trade itself would be a trader sitting at the screen, buy 1,000 British Airways shares, this price please, he clicks the button, and he knows who his counterparty is because he chose that on the screen, and that creates a message. They then have the confirmation element, which is what the SWIFT network helps with. So that then creates a formatted SWIFT message that sends the instructions between banks. And those instructions are supposed to reconcile, but sometimes they don't. For example, I said it was 1,000 shares, but for some reason you've got 1,001. So that settlement might not take place. And then the actual compensation is the moving between depositories of the values or the moving between depositories of the securities. So the shares would change place by being registered with the other person. As far as reconciliation is concerned, there are mechanisms that banks use. The most famous of those in years gone by was one called SSR, or Smart Stream Reconciliation, which was used to be able to reconcile between accounts. So those three elements of trading, confirmation, and settlement are fundamental to the way in which the system works. What's interesting with the tokenization elements is because there is settlement, the minute you create a new block from a previous block on a blockchain, you are the owner of whatever that block represents. So you take away a lot of that mechanism, and in fact, you take away the complete purpose of the SWIFT network, which is then replaced by a blockchain within a distributed ledger system.
Yeah, it's definitely a superior technology. I can see why you obviously advocate it, because I mean, when we start talking, I'm going a little bit off the rails here, but it's very interesting, because when you start to, there's been many statesmen, I won't name them, that have called, because you've got money laundering issues, right? You've got crime networks, all these really bad scenarios are allowed to continue when you have. And I'm not talking about CBDC, right, with the invasion of privacy and that potential, but I'm just saying there needs to be a better system, definitely. And we can use blockchain, distributed ledger or centralized ledger to do that. I don't know if that's going to work out well or not. And that's why we have Terry on, because he's in banking and technology. He was saying before, he's not an economist, just to clarify for everyone. So don't bag him. But that's why I'm sort of taking this opportunity to ask you. Go ahead.
So if you look at the two elements of banking responsibility, which is what we call KYC, know your customer, and AML, anti-money laundering. These two things are fundamental to the security of the financial system. Anti-money laundering, breaking into blockchain currencies and being able to steal them, it's almost impossible. It's not impossible, but it's almost impossible. And it's certainly a lot more difficult than it is with the current system that we use. When it comes to knowing your customer, that then becomes the responsibility of the network, what we would term the value exchange network of a blockchain or a series of blockchains that are connected. Can you participate in that chain? And in order to participate, that's where the KYC mechanism comes in. What does KYC do? Just for those that aren't familiar, it will identify either the person or the organization. If it's an organization, the people behind the organization, their reputation is produced called the OFAC list, prevent certain people on certain. Once a person is approved, then they would be permitted to participate within a particular value exchange network. So you have a similar mechanism to KYC today. One of the interesting things with KYC and the digital age is I can create a non-fungible token, an NFT, that represents everything that's me, who I am, where I live, what my background is, etc. As a result of that, when I go to a new organization, in time, it's not permitted today, but I could take my NFT to another bank and say, here's me, this is what I do, this is my NFT. You can do all of your KYC background checks based on this information here that's current. If the information changes, I just create another NFT based on the first one. So if I change my address, then I have everything from the first NFT. My second NFT is everything from the first one plus the change of address. So I then have a complete history of the background checks that a bank would do for me. So it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, certainly a better system. Actually, the producer just put up a comment there, and I was going to ask you, particularly you, Terry, what happens with the Bank of International Settlements? Because what we've just been discussing for a couple of minutes there in relation to NDB, because we're talking about the NDB, is it possible, what you're talking about, is that possible? And then with the viewer asking, what happens with the Bank of International Settlements? I mean, this is a very important question in the context of the current system.
So when it comes to digital settlement, it's not the NDB's remit today, but certainly the control of a network that would perform settlement amongst sovereign nations using a token. We could call it the unit, as we mentioned last week, but that needs to be an independent organization that is supported by all countries within the BRICS Plus group. So NDB is the only organization, as we know, BRICS today, it's not a legal entity. The only legal entity that represents BRICS in the financial world is the NDB, and it is therefore supported by all sovereign nations. So it could be that there's a decision to take part of the NDB and turn it into if you like, an operational authority of a digital currency. With regard to the Bank of International Settlements, I love the Bank of International Settlements. I think they're fantastic. They do today. And I think they've realized, of course, that just the fact that international settlements will change dramatically because of the new mechanisms that are being used to settle. So the Bank of International Settlements themselves have already run a series of pilots. I mentioned one of those last week. They did one last year, where they invited 94 technology companies. It was distilled down to a final 10, and then they gave out 3 prizes. The second prize that was won from that was a blockchain solution for tokenization and payments between the central bank digital currencies of China, India, and Brazil. It was very successful. As a result of that, I can tell you that right now the Bank of International Settlements is running an invitation program for banks to be able to participate in a new type of digital settlement mechanism. And they'll be announcing, I think it's on the 5th of August, they'll be announcing who the participating banks will be. So they know their remit has to change. And I guess they're probably sitting in several strategy sessions, because regulation will be important, trying to figure out what the role of the Bank of International Settlements will be in the digital age in 5 or 10 years' time.
Right, that's very interesting. See, I'm glad I asked. I'm glad I went off the rails a bit.
Yeah. One of the other points is with this taking place, as Terry mentioned, it was between Brazil, India, and China. is the dominance of the Western-centric organizations that dominate the World Bank and the IMF also tend to dominate within the Bank of International Settlements, and BRICS and whatever they're going to do is going to actually lessen the role of the Bank of International Settlements and its political power.
Interesting. So would you guys say? Well, I guess it's more a question for Terry. Maybe the Bank of International Settlements, they're benign as far as BRICS, NDB. What you said there, Terry, that the BRICS is not really a legal entity, but the NDB is, which the BRICS have established as some sort of consensus, and they. I mean, that's obviously part of the system of BRICS is economic development and development, the physical economies. But I guess I'm asking. What's the attitude of the BIS to BRICS, to the NDB?
I mean, I can't comment on their policy decision towards it. What I can say is when they ran their technology pilot last year, it was specifically looking at BRICS countries and central bank digital currencies. Now, that might be, of course, because the central bank digital currencies are more advanced in BRICS countries than they are in others. But it does at least seem favorable, but it's not for me to comment on their policy.
Okay, no, that's fine. No, we actually, the producer has prompted me to show, and I should show these. This is a little bit. Oh, actually, well, I wanted to show this about the new development bank. Just a couple of points here. There's a few points. Officially agreed to in the BRICS summit in Fortaleza, Brazil, in July 2014. Financing infrastructure and development projects in BRICS and other developing nations. Headquartered in Shanghai, China, with the first rotating presidency held by India, which you saw in the intro, and the capitalization. And so, yeah, so just a little bit of that. Let me just, I thought this is from the NDB's official website too. So this is another reason why I wanted to show this. So you can go here, you can find out all the different things about the NDB. And as Terry has said, this is the actual legal entity of BRICS. So, and I should say, this has always been a bit of an issue for myself, and I think for others. How do we address BRICS as a block? Because it's not actually totally clear, and that's why we really wanted to, with the BCCI and your attempts. Well, you're an advisor to the BCCI, Terry, but to actually, how do people say, for instance, there's an investor, and he wants to invest in the BRICS project going forward, and he wants to be at the table to discuss that in some way, because he's got a couple of billion he wants to throw at something, right? BRICS is growing. I can see a lot of growth here. How do they do that? And we're going to be answering that question. I'm sort of putting that, but if there's something you want to say about that, Terry, or go ahead.
So the BCCI is it's the Chamber of Commerce. So it's like any other Chamber of Commerce, and the purpose of it is to disseminate information, to promote economic ties, to help entrepreneurs and businesses to be able to connect and to look at opportunities. So the events that are run and the connections that are made are specifically to try and tie the abilities and needs of a certain economic requirement within one country and one set of companies with those of another. So we've been looking here in Brazil, for example. A lot of the work we're doing is looking at three particular elements, and that is investment within the empowerment of female-led businesses, within tourism, and within ESG, environment, social governance. And ESG is ever more important. To give you an example, we paid a visit last week, and I'm just going to promote another Brazilian company because I thought they were fantastic. There's a Brazilian company here. They're recycling plastic and building very large Lego blocks. And they've come up with a mechanism of constructing houses within 4 hours based on these blocks. I mean, they're not overly cheap, but they are exceedingly fast. And they're good quality housing. So, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a nice sitting room. All of the wiring and the plumbing is put inside the Lego blocks. And this is a great organization. You look at the needs of being able to produce rapid housing and how that applies across China and India and into parts of Africa, where many of the BRICS nations have social work that they do there in providing housing for people. It's an opportunity for a local company like this to be able to expand their remit, to participate in trade events and others, and to get exposure to the wider community of buyers that come from the BRICS nations. So that's where the BCCI really sits in, is to be able to disseminate information, promote contacts, and run events like any other chamber of commerce.
Yeah, that's exciting. See, that's exactly the sort of meat we want to bring to the audience too. I mean, there's the information, what we're talking about, which is really important and very, I think it's very interesting. But what you just mentioned there with that company making large Lego blocks, right? The kids are going to love that. But obviously, there's the more important aspects. But I think that's really, that gets me excited because that's the development, that's the real meat. Like a few shows ago, we did about the nuclear power plant, and we showed a short video which actually got censored because of the music. But it was, the guys are building stuff, right? There's this massive, and the concrete and the steel, and they're at work. And in a few years, there's going to be energy to desalinate, energy to have an industrial park, lots of jobs, and people actually learning how to build things. And then they go to tertiary institutions, right? And they learn, and they get better wages, and that builds that society. I mean, I'm sort of going on about it, but it is so important. We got some stuff up here, but I want to. We actually did a show about this, so I'll put this up on the channel. We're having such an important discussion on, but I've got to actually show this. And you'll see this on the Think BRICS channel. And this was about the NDB, and this was done about a year ago, and there's more information. So if you want to have a look at that, you'll see. And there's Anastasia, she's presenting that. It's called the BRICS Development Bank, a radical shift in global finance. That's what we're talking about today. So if you'd like some more information, anyway, let me ask Rod something, okay? And Terry, of course, jump in. Your platform provides insights into BRICS activities, Rod, and their global implications. How effective do you believe BRICS has been in promoting economic sovereignty amongst its member nations, and what challenges remain?
Well, obviously, there's still huge challenges remaining, but you only have to look at the last 2 years of the economic shock and awe sanctions introduced against Russia by the US and its vassals in the G7 to see how you can achieve economic sovereignty by strong leadership, clever decisions, and understanding how economics in the world actually work. Rather than making political decisions, making economic decisions. Trading with your friends and with friendly countries, using all of the available ways to actually trade between Russia and China, being in yuan and ruble, within India with rupees, and within rubles, etc. So they've shown that you are not dependent on the Western institutions as much as they thought. So the power that the West thought they had has turned out to be not that powerful. So it's actually illustrated to the members of the BRICS and the global South plus Latin America that it's not that difficult to achieve a level of sovereignty, financial and economic. It just needs a level of will and strong leadership.
Do you think the NDB is a part of that? The leadership?
Obviously, it is a part of it and will be a part of it in the future. But it was mainly the Nabolina of the Russian central bank linking with the ministers, economics ministers, and central bank heads of India, of China, and of Brazil, etc. They realized that you don't have to use the dollar, you don't have to use SWIFT. There are many ways around it. And the dominance that they'd allowed themselves to be forced into using was actually not as powerful as they thought. So, you know, I mean, Russia now, I did an article, it's up on my website, that within Europe, 40% of Russia's trade is now in rubles, right? Okay, a lot of it is gas and fertilizer, but people are paying in rubles. Yeah, they fork out euros to do it, but they have to pay it. And that actually supports the ruble exchange rate, right? So, you know, all what Russia has proven over the last 2 years that told us what we already knew with the likes of Janet Yellen, who told us, 3 years ago, that inflation was transitory. Tell that to your average American consumer, right? Yeah. So it's basically the last 2 years have been an object lesson for the BRICS in the way forward for their own trade, settlement, payments, etc. And that's why I'll come back to it again. I cannot wait for the announcement of what's really going to happen in Kazan, because it's going to be a game changer. It will literally turn the financial world on its head. Over to you, Terry.
Oh, it would be wonderful to see that, and you know, we look forward to what the debate is. Trying to get all governments to agree on something of such magnitude takes time, and Kazan is an important step forward for sure. In my view, we have the opportunity in Kazan to be able to decide what the regulatory framework or what the operational framework of the digital currency will be. The implementation, of course, will come during 25, 26, so it'll be a bit of a long tail onto it, but Kazan is essential in moving this agenda forward.
But would you agree that Russia has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that you do not need to be tied to the dollar anymore? So
I think you know, it's been one of the consequences of sanctions, and I won't talk about the politics of that, but you know, Russia has continued to grow and not to shrink despite sanctions, and part of the reason for that is because they've been able to sell outside of the dollar and SWIFT control to other nations, and they've done that in different currency pairs and had settlement performed through digital currency in many instances to do that. So you know, for good or for bad, the mechanism has been proven to function, and that's really a wake-up call to the Western world, is that can happen at any moment and already has. So as we look at you know, the BRICS countries, with the introduction of the new members being able to use a different mechanism and currency, the level of influence over the economic policy and therefore the economic growth of the planet and its disparities just begins to disappear, and nations begin to have the sovereignty that they voted for when they went for their elections.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sort of leads me into the question for both of you. The collaboration between the NDB and other international financial institutions, like the Islamic Development Bank, is expanding. I guess I don't think people are aware of this. How significant do you think these partnerships are for the global economic landscape? And what potential do they have for fostering sustainable development?
So I want to jump in here because I absolutely I'm cheering that it has every influence and that it grows dramatically. And the reason is Islamic banking is different and it's governed by Sharia law. So under that law, which is part of the Muslim religion, you're not allowed to make money on money, which means that doing loans and paying interest on those loans is something that doesn't happen within approved Islamic banking. So what do? Well, they invest in two things. They either invest in taking a participation in a company, or they invest in performing direct investment. So when we talk about Islamic banking and its impact, one of the problems that the world has had, we go from crisis to economic crisis. 2008, 2009, we saw the collateralization of mortgages, and that led to a wipeout of so much value worldwide. Why was that? It's because we invent things which is making money on money. Whereas if I really need money, if I have a good quality business under Islamic banking, I can go to my bank and say, look, I need 100 million. My company's doing this. This is our business plan. This is where we're going. And they will give a direct equity investment into the business. They will exit at some point in the future, of course. That's normal business. But what they won't do is drive greedy banking processes. And as a result, it brings us back to a mechanism of banking, which is the reason why banks were created in the first place. Banks provide a bridge. Banks provide a bridge for trust and confidence. And when banks create these greedy mechanisms to make money, then we lose that trust. So I do hope that under the principles of sensible investing and economic development and infrastructure development, that the influence of the new partners within BRICS Plus, the United Arab Emirates in particular, but we also have Saudi Arabia there or thereabouts, that these nations will ensure that there's good economic policy and that investments are made as investments and not as gambling.
Yeah, Terry, I think an important point that you just missed there, but you covered it, but I didn't actually emphasize it, is in Islamic banking, you can't charge interest, but making a profit is not a problem. Because you're making a profit is you are using your capital to benefit the company that you're investing in, so you're entitled to make a profit. It's a benefit, it's not interest.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, so not usury, right? That's the difference. Usury and right. That's sound.
You share the risk. We talk about sharing risk, sharing reward, and there it is in all of its beauty. You share the risk. You participate in the share capital of the company, and you're perfectly entitled to make money when you come out the other end because you participated in the risk. There is very little risk when you lend money at interest with high levels of collateral that are 2 or 3 times the value of the loan. That's anyway. As you can see, I'm rather passionate about this development. I think it's appropriate and it's a lesson for the world.
Good.
I agree, Terry. I agree.
Yeah, because this is sort of like what you were saying before too, Terry, where BRICS is not a legal entity, but the NDB is set up, and in the initiative that BRICS is taking to have financial independence, physical development of the nations. So the Islamic institutions, they were set up obviously to do that in a moral way, which is basically what that is. It's morally to do that, for the benefit of the people. That must be a really good relationship that they're having, the NDB and these other banks. I mean, so that they must be really happy about that too, because obviously you're happy about that because it's being successful. Do you foresee any issues with that, or that's going to go well?
I have to tread carefully in comments here because so the principles of Islamic banking and the lack of usury, the shared risk, the genuine shared risk, the policy of growth and investment in partnership. All of these are wonderful things. There are three pillars in this world of politics, religion, and commerce. My area is commerce, and that's what I comment on. So the religious aspects of Sharia law and where that fits into Islamic banking, I think the principles are great. I think they should be applied more broadly across Western organizations for sure, but I don't comment on politics or religion publicly like this.
No, that's cool.
No, I mean, Terry, I think the point Terry was avoiding mentioning, given the fact that he's been employed by some of the most rapacious capitalist banks on the planet, JP Morgan. I suppose he's worked for Goldman Sachs, but I mean, they are basically, they make piranhas look like friendly kittens.
No, it's true. I shouldn't laugh, but I mean, that's where we obviously.
So Terry just being polite, and I can fully understand why he doesn't want to say that the whole of Wall Street and the city of London is based on sheer greed. I mean,
so there's a driver on CNN's website, How's the Market Today? And it goes from fear to greed, depending on whether the market's good. But it's not just there. And I mean, these are fantastic companies, and I think they're very important. But let me give you another example, which is local down here in Brazil. So when I sold a Brazilian a year and a half ago, we grew it for 14 years. We reached the point after the first 2-3 years we needed some capital. We went to a local bank. We asked for a loan. They were happy to do that. They wanted the contracts as guarantees, which is fine. And they offered an interest rate which was around about 2%. And that's absolutely amazing. 2% interest. I mean, give me all the money you can give me. And then you realize that in Brazil, they don't talk in 2% a year. They're talking about
a month,
2% a month.
Whoa, that's
so then
crazy.
When you get interest on interest, you're coming out at around 28% a year.
Yeah.
And that is the sort of policy. And I understand why they have it in Brazil. Okay. They have it because there's a lot of bad debt. So they need to try and get their money with interest, their capital repaid as quickly as possible. And it does that. But it's a vicious cycle because the interest rates are so high, the payments are so high that as a result, people can't make the payments. And so there's a bad debt. And if you ever took money out of a bank on a credit card in Brazil, you'd be paying 700% a year.
Well,
and that just
yeah.
Now,
I mean,
balance that, the development banks like BNDES, Caixa Econômica, Bank of Brazil, and others, they do lend money at an annual interest rate, depending on what it's for, in many cases, of between 4% and 6% a year. And that's acceptable, and it's a good rate for people to be able to make economic progress. But they're not the only country. There are several countries that have these exorbitant interest rates on loans. They justify it by saying that the level of bad debt is high, and that's understandable. But at some point, it has to change. And introduction of Islamic principles would really help.
Sure.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Setting an example, a moral example. That's very interesting facet of this, I think. Let me go to the next one. Okay. So this is a question for Terry. All right. So how does the BCCI engage with BRICS initiatives, and what opportunities do you see for businesses in BRICS countries to enhance their economic ties with non-BRICS nations, particularly in regions like Africa? We talked a little bit about this, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think, as we mentioned before, BRICS it's a chamber of commerce, so therefore it's looking at commercial enterprises more than government. So as we look at what companies are able to produce, each BCCI, each country has its own representative at the chamber. And the work that's done is to look for those organizations and opportunities within the country that have the capability of providing exports to other BRICS nations. So here in Brazil, we've done that with Parfim. I mentioned earlier FUBRICS, and there are several other organizations we look at. Secondly, the elements that we work on with investment is to see how we can attract foreign investment from BRICS countries into Brazil. primarily, as I mentioned, for female-run businesses, for tourism, and for ESG. So the Lego bricks houses fits firmly into ESG. And through events, through direct contacts, and the network that we have within the BCCI network itself, we're able to create visibility for companies that they wouldn't have had before. What happens is with BRICS countries is that a number of the governments have, as I mentioned, social programs. And so looking at other countries that are developing, that's a primary objective as well of the NDB, in addition to supporting BRICS nations themselves. They're looking at emerging economies. And so providing some level of support and help and some access as well to companies within those emerging countries is a key objective. I haven't seen too much of that in Brazil yet. We have a lot to work with amongst Brazilian companies themselves, but it is something I would hope to see, is that smaller nations can get easier access to BRICS countries and to Brazil in our case in particular.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Okay. We're getting close to the hour, which we try not to go over. So let's start to wrap this up. Because we also wanted to mention that NDB is planning to help out with the flooding situation Brazil is facing right now. It's a very serious situation, with an area the size of Belarus or Romania underwater. It's a shame that the world media hasn't covered this disaster more. Hopefully Cherry will be able to tell us more and also explain the support the NDB plans to provide.
It was interesting. My mother, who I love to bits, rarely ever phones me, but a couple of weeks ago she called me to see if I was okay. So I didn't actually know why she was calling, but it was because of the floods in Brazil, and that was covered in the UK. But I don't think people understand the scale of the disaster here. It's absolutely heartbreaking. So you have 11 million people within the southern state of Rio Grande do Sul. There are 497 municipalities, and over 490 of them have been affected by very, very severe flooding. Interestingly, when President Dilma was president in Brazil, she did a study at the time of the increase of rainfall, particularly in the southern states, and they determined that there'd been a 15% increase already, and that something like this could well happen. And it's not just this year. Last year, 2023, there were 75 people who were killed as a result of flooding in the same area. Today, the situation is desperate. It's horrific. There are over 500,000 people who have been affected. There have been 169 deaths from the floods or things related to the floods. That includes the lack of clean water and disease. Leptospirosis, for example, has killed people following the floods. Just the need for clean water, let alone clothes. There's an airport, a major airport, which has been closed. It's not going to be open this year. If you look at the levels of some of the rivers, one of the main rivers in one of the major cities, it's still running at over 4 meters higher than it should be, and people will not be able to return until it's under 3 meters. And it continues to rain. So throughout Brazil, and in fact, Uruguay as well, other South American countries, Uruguay was also a bit affected by this, and that's not been mentioned. There are campaigns of donations of money and clothes and simple sanitary products and things that are absolutely essential that are being given. But of course, the rebuild is going to be substantial. This is a part of the country that represents one of the significant areas for agriculture and for farming, with over 90% of some commodities, 90% of Brazil's production coming from Rio Grande do Sul. So it's going to have a longer term impact as well on the production of farming goods. And for that reason, a lot of support is needed. So the NDB has already stated that they will be providing just over $1.1 billion. That's well over 5 billion reais. That couples with money that's also being provided by Caixa Econômica and by the development banks here. The central government of Brazil has frozen the repayments on debt from the Rio Grande do Sul government for a period, I can't remember whether it's 3 or 5 years, but it's a significant period. And they're also providing 50 billion reais, $10 billion, to help provide redevelopment as things become a little bit clearer. In some cases, it's still raining. So this isn't over yet. And yes, certainly, as we look to the future and ask what needs to be done, given that there were warnings of how bad this could get, there is a need to take action right now to be able to build defenses and to consider drainage and perhaps even some resiting of people where necessary, because this can continue to happen. So it's very devastating, as you say. It's difficult to imagine. This is an area of 11 million people, the size of Romania, and it is underwater. It's one of the worst disasters and the worst flooding that's been known since the 1940s in Brazil. So I want to thank you for bringing it to the attention here. People should know about it.
Yeah, they should. Yeah, and the NDB is a critical part of because $1 billion is a lot of money, but this is a massive area that's still affected. Just to reiterate, did you just say that area is 90% of the agricultural production for Brazil? Is that what you said?
Not of all things, but there's significant production of certain elements. In one case, I can't remember what the commodity is, but I can look it up. If you want to know, let me know. But one of the commodities, it is 90% of Brazil's production. It also has a significant production of soya. It's one of the largest farming areas for cows. So I think it's around about 12 to 13% of beef production in Brazil. It's an area that's full of farmers. The area down there was originally settled by the Guarani tribes, and then during the 1800s, 1820s, 1830s, a lot of Germans and Italians moved into the area. There are actually villages there where German is the first language, and given that Germans are tall and have blonde hair and blue eyes, you'll see a number of the models that come out of Brazil, such as the beloved Gisele Bündchen, who also has donated to help, comes from the south as well. So it's an area that's very into farming. It's exceedingly important in the Brazilian commodities production area, and this is a tragedy from a food production perspective for Brazil, as the harvest this year, many of them just won't happen.
Yeah. Well, I've no doubt that Russia will be doing its bit. It's always had a very good relationship with Brazil, and I've no doubt that Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov will be quite active in making sure that what help that the Russian people can give to their friends in Brazil will be happening. And I hope that is the case is going on now.
No, thanks, Rod. Thank you, Terry. There's the producer actually brought this to my attention because it's not in the media as it should be. So that's what we're doing here on this channel, but we're going to close off. We've gone over. So thank you to you guys for coming along and sharing your expertise. I really appreciate it, Terry. Rod, Rod's been here many times, and it's really important. He's made Terry feel comfortable, and we want to have you back, Terry. We've got some ideas that we're going to talk about, and particularly tonight where you mentioned about the Lego company. I love Lego because it's it's the imagination, right? As a child, that's what it's about. You want your children to imagine and have pride and look into the future with optimism. And that sort of thing, that's the real meat. And I also wanted to mention too, I really shouldn't do this so much because we're going over time, but when you're talking about ESG, there's a section of our society across the world who see this as a very negative thing. And there are negative aspects to it, but what you've presented tonight and this morning is very important for people to see there's this other part. And there's a political, which, Terry, you don't want to go into, which is fine. But there's a political fight which the citizenry needs to participate in so that it goes, like Terry has explained, that there are very important aspects, just like the environment. There's parts to do with the sustainable development. And I'm just airing this out here right now as we end off, that there's issues with it. But if the citizenry participates, and the Think BRICS channel is not a political channel per se, it's about BRICS and bringing the information. But we want people to be aware and they participate in their areas. So anyway, I just want people to reflect on that a little bit. Terry's trying to not be political, but he's stressing the importance, and he's giving you a little bit of meat and potatoes about what you probably hadn't thought about in respect to things like ESG, sustainable development, right? So anyway, let me end off. Thank you very much, guys. I'll take it from here. So we'll see you next time. All right.
Thanks, Paul. Good to see you, Rod. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for tuning in to BRICS Briefs. If you've enjoyed this dive into the multipolar world and wish to join the conversation, please comment below. Next week, we are hoping to have Professor Patrick Bond from the University of Johannesburg's Department of Sociology. Patrick has an extensive background that we should let him tell you about if we see him next week, so hopefully. The professor will feature a polemic opinion on BRICS, so be prepared to be challenged. Get your comments and questions in during the live stream to take advantage of the professor being with us for that one. Please like and share this episode to spread it as far as possible. You can follow us on our Substack and other social media platforms, all linked below. Stay curious, stay connected, stay optimistic, and let's keep exploring together. Ciao.